I didn't need the champagne flute raised halfway to her lips or the phone angled perfectly for Instagram. I didn't need the practiced pause before she said it. I knew what was coming because that's the role she's always assigned me in this family script. My sister Selena said, tilting her head with a smile sharp enough to slice porcelain works like a poor trash worker. The words didn't drop softly. They clattered across the table like cutlery hitting the floor, bouncing into every ear in that glowing room. The kind of insult dressed in silk delivered with a laugh so no one has to take responsibility for hearing it. And no one did. Not my mother Margaret with her rose-tinted blush and her soft denying smile that always insists she didn't mean it that way. Not my father Gerard glued to his phone like the screen might spare him from choosing sides. Not even Adrian Selena's fiancé, who adjusted his cufflinks and laughed politely like cruelty was just another LinkedIn skill to endorse. It might have been bearable if the insult had only been a knife. But worse than her words was how ordinary they felt, like being erased had always been part of the menu. The room didn't shatter. It hummed. The clink of forks against plates. The low murmur of conversation picking up exactly where it had left off, as though I wasn't sitting there, blood rushing hot under my skin. No one defended me. Not a single voice pushed back. And that was when the real irony landed sharp and clean as glass cracking under pressure. Because the whole time they weren't sitting in some 5-star venue Selena had curated for her big night. They weren't basking under chandeliers someone else had rented, waiting for courses shipped from some anonymous kitchen. No, every single one of them was sitting in my house. My restaurant. My floors scrubbed until they shone. My menu crafted with hands that had bled for years. Selena called me poor trash while eating off plates I'd chosen, sipping wine I'd stocked beneath lights I'd paid to keep burning. And none of them knew it. Not my sister. Not my parents. Not even the man about to marry her. They thought I was just another guest, another piece of furniture in Selena's show. They didn't see the walls around them pulsing with the hours I had worked. They didn't feel the weight of my name carved quietly into every receipt, every reservation, every paycheck that kept this building alive. But I felt it. With every breath. With every glance toward the staff who moved like shadows, careful, trained, loyal, and who knew? Marcus, my manager, caught my eye once across the room, the barest flicker of recognition. Elena, steady in the background, poured water with hands that trembled just slightly, as though holding back a truth too heavy to spill before its time. And then came the voice that cracked the performance open. It wasn't family. It wasn't blood. It was a guest tilting their head, scanning the table. A question tossed casually the way people do when they sense something just a little off in the staging. What's the owner doing, eating with the guests? The words hovered in the air, hotter than Selena's insult, heavier than my silence. In that instant, it was no longer just about me and her. It was about every glass lifted, every bite, taken, every person at that table suddenly realizing the script had been wrong all along. I sat there still as stone, letting the question hang. Because that's the thing about truth. You don't always have to shout it. Sometimes you just set the table light, the candles, and wait. Selena wanted me invisible. She wanted me erased, pressed into the background of her spotlight. But you can't erase the walls that hold you, the air you breathe, the foundation under your feet. And that night, every single person at that table was sitting inside the life I had built. So when she called me a poor trash worker, she wasn't just mocking me. She was mocking the very ground keeping her party afloat. The story should have ended with her laughter. It should have been swallowed like the last sip of wine, brushed aside with polite smiles and the scrape of dessert forks. But the guest's question didn't fade. It echoed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Because that dinner, their perfect engagement dinner, was never hers to control. It was mine. And they were about to find out. Have you ever been humiliated in front of a crowd? Comment 1 if yes. Comment 0 if no. The message came in the middle of the afternoon when the kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and the ovens hissed with steam. I was bent over a tasting plate, adjusting the angle of a sprig of thyme, when my phone buzzed across the counter. For 1 second, I let myself believe it might be something warm, Marcus checking in with a quiet update, or Elena sending me one of her brief clip notes of encouragement. But it wasn't. The screen lit up with my mother's name, the same familiar string of letters that had always made my stomach tighten before I even touched the screen. And then beneath it, just 3 short lines. Engagement dinner. Maison Verde. Thursday, 7 p.m. That was it. No hello, no how are you. No mention of my name. No acknowledgement of the years I had poured into those walls. Just information dropped like a calendar notification, stripped of every ounce of human warmth. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words didn't change. The coldness wasn't accidental. It was the style of communication she preferred, short-clip transactional. Messages from my mother always felt like receipts rather than conversations, as though emotion were an extra charge she wasn't willing to cover. But what struck me hardest wasn't the absence of kindness. It was the absence of recognition. Maison Verde, not just any venue. Not a place she had stumbled across in a magazine spread or heard whispered about at her Pilates class. Maison Verde was mine. The flagship I had spent years building. The house where I had burned myself raw to prove I could exist outside the Hale family script. Every tile, every polished glass, every line of the menu had my fingerprints on it. I had chosen the shades of green for the velvet banquettes, had argued over the grain of the oak tables, had stayed late nights tasting sauce reductions until my tongue went numb. Maison Verde wasn't just a restaurant. It was the proof of my life, the artifact of every sacrifice I had made while the rest of them scrolled Instagram and practiced their smiles. And in her message, it was reduced to a location pin, a backdrop, a prop. Not once did she write your restaurant. Not once did she acknowledge what it cost me to build it. To her, it was simply convenient, another stage to rent for her daughter's performance. My sister's engagement dinner performed under my roof without my name attached, without my story allowed inside. I stood there, phone in hand, watching the letters blur against the screen light. Around me, the kitchen kept moving. Knives hitting cutting boards, pots clanging, voices calling out orders. The rhythm of work steady and familiar, like a heart still beating even as the mind fractures. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I let the words settle in heavier with every second. Engagement dinner, Maison Verde, Thursday, 7 p.m. The announcement wasn't just a command. It was a reminder. A reminder that to my family, my identity was always negotiable, always erased when it threatened their script. I typed a reply, once erased it. Typed again. Something sharp. Something that would cut through the coldness. Something that would say, you know exactly whose restaurant that is. But I couldn't bring myself to hit send. Because my mother had always been a master at erasure, at covering silence with blush and soft tones. Any reply from me would be flattened into her story, absorbed into her version of events, where I was always the one overreacting, always the one too sensitive. So I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the phone into my apron and turned back to the plate. The time leaned just slightly to the left, imperfect human. I left it that way. Let the imperfection breathe, because it was mine. The kitchen noise filled back in, wrapping around me like armor. But the message lingered, etched into the air, pulsing against my ribs. My mother had sent a cold invitation to a dinner meant to erase me, hosted inside the very building that was supposed to be my Declaration of Independence. And as the oven door slammed shut behind me, I knew this wasn't just an engagement dinner. This was a performance, a stage, a battle dressed in linen and candlelight. And they thought I would sit quietly in the audience. But Maison Verde had a memory, even if my mother didn't. Every brick, every seam, every hidden corner of that place carried my name. And on Thursday night, when the Hale family sat down to celebrate under its lights, the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. Because I wasn't just invited. I was already there. The street was still damp from an afternoon rain when I pulled up outside Maison Verde. The pavement glistened under the street lamps, and the air smelled faintly of wet leaves and exhaust. For a moment, I sat in my car with the engine ticking hands still on the wheel, staring at the facade I had chosen stone by stone. Even from here, the sign caught me, polished metal catching light gold against green, shimmering like a crown. I remembered the night I'd approved that design, how the drafts had come back again and again, too gaudy, too flat, until I insisted on this finish, this glow. It has to reflect, I'd told them. People should see themselves in it. And now, as the last of the rain dripped down the glass, I watched my own face distort in its reflection, stretched and trembling across the letters of the name I had carved into the city. Maison Verde. I killed the engine, stepped out, and let the sound of my heels tap against the wet stone. The street was quiet except for the low hum of traffic a block away, and in the stillness the sign seemed to burn brighter a beacon in the gray. It didn't care that tonight it had been rented dressed up for someone else's play. It still whispered what it had always whispered. This house is yours. The doors slid open when I approached the scent of rosemary and char still clinging to the air, my kitchen working like a body with or without me. And there at the podium stood Marcus. His posture was straight, his tie perfectly knotted, but when his eyes landed on me, something cracked. For a second, surprise flickered across his face as though he hadn't fully believed I would come. "Ms. Hale," he said. Voice low, almost reverent. No one else heard it. Just me, just him, a title folded carefully into the air like a secret. He didn't call me Olivia. He didn't call me by some casual nickname. He called me Ms. Hale the way he always did when it mattered, when the weight of ownership had to be acknowledged, even if the world wanted to forget. I nodded, letting the words settle between us. There was respect in it, but there was also warning. He knew what tonight meant. He knew the risk of me stepping through those doors before the guests arrived, before the performance began. But he didn't try to stop me. He never did. Marcus had always been the quiet spine of this place, carrying weight others pretended not to see. I glanced past him into the dining room. The tables were already dressed linen-pressed smooth crystal, catching the glow of overhead fixtures, candles waiting to be lit. The room looked like it had been staged for a magazine spread sterile and perfect, but I could still see the bones beneath. The oak tables I had chosen after walking a lumberyard in the rain. The lighting fixtures I'd argued for warm and low, meant to flatter skin and soften tempers. Even the chairs, God, I remembered sitting in them in the warehouse, testing the weight, the give of the cushion, imagining strangers settling in for hours of laughter of truth. Every detail still carried my fingerprints, even though tonight my name was nowhere on the invitations. Marcus shifted, clearing his throat. "They'll be here soon." He said words carefully neutral. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. I know. He studied me, eyes sharp behind his professional calm. There was loyalty there, but also worry. He had worked under me long enough to recognize the storm brewing, the kind that didn't announce itself with thunder, but with silence. I moved past him, letting my hand trail across the edge of the podium. The wood was smooth, polished with years of use. I had signed delivery slips there, corrected reservations, welcomed strangers with my own voice when Marcus was off. How many nights had I stood in this very spot unseen by the family who now believed it was theirs to claim for one glittering evening? The sign outside still glowed through the glass, casting a faint reflection across the marble floor. My name wasn't on the guest list, but it was written into every beam, every seam, every polished surface of this place. They could try to erase me from their narrative, but erasure doesn't work when the evidence gleams in metal and light. I breathed in the scent of my restaurant, the citrus polish, the faint char from the grill, the ghost of fresh bread. This was my exhibit, my proof, And when the Hales walked through those doors tonight, when they lifted their glasses and pretended the world belonged to them, they would be doing it under a sign that bore my reflection. Marcus lingered at the edge of the room, watching me, waiting for direction he knew I wouldn't give. His whisper still hung in the air, quiet and true, Ms. Hale. And for the first time all day, I let myself feel the weight of it. Not as a reminder of what they had taken, but as proof of what they couldn't touch. The sign would shine all night, no matter how much they tried to look past it. And every time its light caught the corner of their eyes, it would remind them this house had an owner. And she was already here. The room was already humming with the kind of energy I had designed it to hold, soft laughter. The muted clink of glass, a low tide of voices rising and falling under chandeliers I'd chosen for exactly that reason. The curtains were drawn tight against the street, sealing the world out, and the air smelled of seared rosemary, lemon butter, and wine, breathing open in tall glasses. Guests were beginning to arrive, their shoes clicking against the marble in rhythms that echoed through my chest. I moved carefully quiet, slipping between servers who carried trays lined with amuse-bouches, each plate a tiny canvas of color. It would have been easy to blend in. I'd built this place with the intention of being invisible, the architect who didn't need to stand in front of her work to be validated. But invisibility hurts differently when it isn't chosen. I had just leaned against the curve of a banquette, steadying myself with the polished wood when I felt a presence at my elbow. A young server face flushed from the rush tray, balanced in one trembling hand. She was new, her name escaped me, but I remembered the way Marcus had muttered to her last week in the prep room, correcting the fold of a napkin. Tonight, her nerves were sharp in the air. She tilted her chin toward a table where condensation from a sweating glass had dripped, leaving a small pool shining under the candlelight. "Excuse me," she whispered, her eyes sliding past me as though I were another piece of staff. "Could you wipe that down?" She extended a cloth already damp, waiting for me to take it. For a heartbeat, I froze. The cloth hovered in the space between us, the air thick with the weight of her assumption. It shouldn't have mattered. God knows I've wiped down more tables in my life than I can count, crouched on aching knees, fingers red from sanitizer. But tonight, the request pierced deeper than it should have, straight through the armor I had been building since that first message from my mother. Because this wasn't a stranger's restaurant. This wasn't a shift I'd been scheduled for. This was my house. And yet here was someone looking at me and seeing nothing more than hands for cleaning a body meant to bend and disappear. The ache wasn't in the cloth. It was in the recognition of how easily people slip into the roles written for them, how quickly others believe what your family says about you. Poor trash worker. The insult still burned, stitched into my skin from the night before, and now this girl had given it form without even knowing. Before I could speak, before I could decide whether to take the cloth just to ease her nerves or to let the silence sharpen, Marcus appeared. He moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if he'd been watching from the corner waiting for this exact moment. His hand cut through the space, gentle but firm, intercepting the cloth before it touched my fingers. "She's with the Hale party," he said, his voice pitched low but certain, the kind of tone that carried authority without shouting. The girl blinked, startled, her cheeks reddening. She stammered an apology, her tray wobbling dangerously before she caught it against her hip. She disappeared into the blur of movement as fast as she had arrived, swallowed by the current of staff weaving through the dining room. I stood there, pulse thrumming, Marcus's words still echoing. She's with the Hale party, not the owner, not the architect of this night, this building, this entire reality they were about to consume. Just another name attached to the family who had spent years erasing me. Marcus had meant to protect me, to shield me from embarrassment, and for that I felt the faintest swell of gratitude. But the sting remained. Because even in defense, my role had been reshaped, reduced to an extension of them. The ache of it sat heavy in my chest. I looked around the room, the polished silver, the candlelight, the perfectly balanced plates, and all I could see were fingerprints. Mine. Every detail had cost me years, scars, sleepless nights. And yet in this moment, I was being folded neatly into their story, mistaken for help, corrected into a guest of honor, only by proximity to a family that had never honored me. Marcus's eyes met mine briefly, steady, apologetic, without words. He knew. He always knew. I inhaled slowly, the air thick with wine and garlic, and let the moment settle like a bruise under the skin. Painful quiet, but undeniable. Somewhere beyond the doors, more guests were arriving. The Hale family would be here soon, stepping under the sign that gleamed outside, taking their seats at tables I had chosen, lifting glasses filled by hands I had trained. And they would look at me, if they looked at me at all, and still fail to see. The cloth was gone. The server had vanished. But the sting lingered, carved into the night. Because nothing cuts deeper than being mistaken for exactly what your family has always claimed you are. Have you ever been mistaken for less, judged only by how you look? Comment 1 for yes, 0 for no. The table was set the way I had always imagined it for strangers. Not family linen so white it caught every flicker of candle flame, glasses breathing with wine that carried smoke and cherry on its tongue, silverware aligned like soldiers waiting for orders. I slid into my seat at the far end, the one that had been left open as though by accident. Though I knew better. My presence was tolerated, not requested, and the chair had the quiet feel of a concession, rather than a welcome. I laid my palms flat on the tablecloth to steady myself, the fabric cool under my skin, the hum of the restaurant wrapping around me like a pulse. Selena was already glowing at the center of it all, her champagne glass lifted like a prop, her phone angled just so to catch the curve of her smile. She thrived in the spotlight camera lights or candlelight, it made no difference. For her, every table was a stage, every gathering an audience. And tonight she had arranged the perfect production herself in pearls and satin. Her fiancé at her side, my parents nodding in approval, as if the evening had been written in scripture. When her eyes met mine, the smile tightened, sharpened. She didn't need the microphone. Her voice carried with the ease of someone who had always been heard. "Trongam," she said, leaning back just enough for the room to listen. "Convenient. Like the work you do." The words slipped through the air like perfume sweet at first, then sour, clinging to the skin long after you want it gone. The insult wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She had perfected the art of cruelty delivered with poise, the kind that left just enough deniability for my mother to later insist it was meant kindly. But the knife in it was undeniable. I felt every eye at the table shift not toward me, but toward her, waiting for the performance to continue. My mother adjusted her bracelet, her lips curving into that practiced smile that smoothed over everything sharp. My father had bent over his phone, didn't look up. He never did when the air grew heavy. And then Adrian, her fiancé, lifted his glass. His tie was knotted perfectly, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture impeccable. The kind of man who belonged on corporate pamphlets, not at a table meant for intimacy. He nodded, solemn, polite. His voice dipped in syrup, but hollow at the core. "Well said," he murmured, the faintest smile touching his lips, as though he were commending her for closing a deal. There was no warmth in it, no conviction. Just the echo of agreement, empty and rehearsed. He wasn't laughing at me. He wasn't defending me either. He was doing what men like him always did, aligning himself with the power in the room, smoothing the path for the woman who glittered beside him. His nod wasn't just approval. It was an endorsement, the kind you leave on someone's profile for skills you've never actually seen. I sat still, feeling the words settle around me, heavy as stones in water. Convenient. Like the work you do. As though building this house, shaping it out of nothing, keeping it alive through years of sacrifice and sweat could ever be called convenient. As though the life I had carved out in the shadows of their judgment were nothing more than a favor. A shortcut. An accident of timing. The candle flames wavered in their glass cages, reflecting in the wine, reflecting in Selena's pearls. Around me, the staff moved with precision, their faces impassive, trained to ignore family dramas that pulsed louder than any dinner rush. But I caught Marcus's glance from across the room, the barest flicker of recognition in his eyes. He had heard it too. He knew the sting it carried. I pressed my fingers tighter against the linen, grounding myself. I could have spoken then, could have let the truth slice through the performance and scatter their perfect staging into shards. But the words caught in my throat, not from fear, but from calculation. Timing mattered. Evidence mattered. And tonight was not the night to bleed too early. Selena tilted her head back, laughing softly at her own wit. Adrian's nod feeding her like applause. My mother leaned in to whisper something, her voice low and melodic, a soundtrack of denial. My father's thumb scrolled across his phone, never pausing, never breaking rhythm. And I sat at my own table in my own house, treated as though I were convenient. But under the white linen and polished silver, under the smiles and nods and hollow compliments, I felt something else building. Not rage, not sorrow. Certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when you know the walls around you are yours, when the ground under their polished shoes belongs to you, when every sip of wine they praised had been chosen by your hand. Selena could call me convenient. Adrian could nod in hollow agreement. My parents could sit in silence. But the truth had already been set, coursing under the surface, waiting for its moment to rise. And as I watched her laugh, I thought, convenient is a word for what you use, not what you own. And everything in this room belonged to me. The first toast came sooner than I expected. The plates had only just been cleared from the opening course, the scent of seared scallops and fennel still clinging in the air when my father finally looked up from his phone. Gerard Hale, head down, glasses, always slipping toward the end of his nose. His thumbs forever in motion, lifted his eyes for once. and in that rare moment, instead of meeting mine, he reached for the stem of his glass. The room quieted automatically, as if the clink of his cufflink against crystal was some ancient bell. Conversations fell away. Forks settled, the candlelight seemed to still. It was the rhythm of tradition. The patriarch speaks. The family listens. The script resumes. To Adrian, my father said his voice flat, but meant to sound regal, like he was laying down history instead of words. The man who elevates our family. The syllables landed like stones, heavy and misplaced, piling up in front of me. Around the table, heads nodded with mechanical agreement. My mother smiled softly, as if the toast had been rehearsed with her approval. Selena beamed the spotlight, catching the sharp line of her jaw, her hand finding Adrian's like she had just won a crown. And Adrian himself. He bowed his head with a humility so polished it glowed like glass. His smile was precise, practiced. The LinkedIn smile. The one that makes every connection look like opportunity. Every nod look like destiny. He raised his glass in perfect synchrony with my father's, as if they had been clinking glasses for decades instead of months. The applause was not real applause. It was the low thrum of agreement, the shuffle of voices murmuring assent, the scrape of glasses lifted by obligation. It filled the room like smoke, making the air harder to breathe. I sat still, my glass untouched at first, my hand resting lightly against its stem. To Adrian, the man who elevates our family. I let the words sink in, taste their bitterness before the wine ever touched my lips. Adrian hadn't built this room. He hadn't hired the staff that moved with precision behind him. He hadn't chosen the oak tables, or the chandeliers hadn't tasted sauce after sauce until the right one lived on his tongue. He hadn't kept the lights on through nights when the bank balance quivered on the edge of collapse. He hadn't scraped floors raw with bleach when staff walked out, or negotiated deliveries with vendors who looked at me and saw only a girl too young, too stubborn to last. I had. And yet here he was, celebrated as the savior, the elevator of a family that had never raised itself without leaning on someone else's back. My lips curved, but not into a smile. I finally lifted my glass, the stem cold against my fingers, and took a sip. Not a toast. Not an agreement. Just a swallow of something dark to cool the heat in my throat. The wine spread across my tongue, full-bodied, rich, chosen by me months ago when I'd sat in a cellar tasting each note until it sang. I drank not to Adrian, but to myself. To the silence I had kept this long, to the truth that still lay coiled, waiting under the table like a hidden blade. Across the room, Marcus stood near the service doors, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze steady. He didn't lift a glass. He didn't need to. He had seen every hour of sweat, every moment of despair and triumph that had built this house. His loyalty didn't need words, but the rest of them. They nodded, they clinked, they drank. They gave Adrian the crown of gratitude, the title of savior. My father's phone buzzed the moment his glass touched the table again, and he was gone back into his screen, his toast already fading like smoke. My mother leaned toward Selena, whispering something with a smile so gentle it could erase any jagged edge. Selena preened, her laughter rising high and bright, her pearls gleaming under the candlelight. And I let my silence speak louder than any toast. I drank, but not to him. Never to him. I drank to the walls that held us, the floor under our feet, the chandeliers that glowed above every piece of it, chosen, shaped, built by me. Let them toast their illusion. Let them believe Adrian was their rising star, because soon enough the stage they performed on would remind them whose house it truly was. The plates arrived in waves, carried by hands trained to glide, not stumble. I watched them come the way I always did, not as a guest, but as the architect behind the curtain. Each dish landed like a small performance, and with every placement, I felt the tug between what I knew and what they chose not to see. To my family, it was dinner. To me, it was evidence, every plate, a confession of my fingerprints, every detail, a piece of proof. The onions were the first tell. Caramelized until translucent gold, glazed with stock and vinegar that had been coaxed down over 48 long hours. 48 hours of patient reduction, the kind that demands discipline most kitchens don't have the stomach for. Not a shortcut. Not a trick, but a ritual of waiting, stirring, watching. The glaze caught the candlelight when the server set the dish down, gleaming like amber across porcelain. To anyone else, it was garnish. To me, it was history. Long nights bent over a stove, my palms red from steam, my back aching from the weight of persistence. The family didn't notice. Not Selena, who leaned forward only to frame the dish with her phone, her thumb tapping until the angle flattered her manicure. Not Adrian, who smiled like the plate had been laid just to flatter him, murmuring something polite without even lifting his fork. Not my mother, who dabbed her lips and complimented the candlelight, not the food. My father's eyes flicked to the plate and back to his phone, a glance as shallow as a raindrop on glass. But the glaze glowed anyway, and I saw it. Next came the cut of the lamb roasted with precision under lights calibrated for warmth, not glare. Months earlier, I had argued with the lighting designer, insisting that the fixtures be angled to kiss the plates to make each dish look alive. He had rolled his eyes, muttered about unnecessary detail, but I had stood firm because food deserves to be seen, not shadowed. Tonight, the lamb caught the light exactly as I had intended, the edges bronzed, the center tender and pink, a silent display of everything they had overlooked. My family didn't see the calibration. They saw abundance indulgence, the privilege of being served. They didn't understand how many late nights I had spent walking this room, adjusting each bulb by degrees, making certain that nothing glared too harshly or fell into dullness. They didn't see the craft. They consumed the result. Everywhere I looked, the room whispered my name in ways they were too blind to hear. The salt flakes on the bread sourced after 3 failed suppliers. The curve of the chairs tested against dozens until I found the one that let you linger without discomfort. The glassware chosen because it sang when tapped a pure, clear note that told me it had been forged well. Each of these things was an exhibit, a piece of proof more honest than any speech I could deliver. And yet at the table, the conversation swelled around everything but the truth. Selena laughed about her engagement photo shoot, recounting how the photographer caught her in natural light. Adrian nodded with solemn agreement, his hand brushing hers like a public statement. My mother cooed about how perfect it all was, my father scrolling even as he mumbled his assent. The staff moved like ghosts, silent and precise. Marcus watched from a distance, his eyes catching mine, once a flicker of acknowledgement that he knew I was cataloging every detail. Elena, steady as ever, set down plates with a firmness that betrayed the pride she still carried even if she no longer worked directly under me. They both knew the truth. They could see the exhibits laid out, the kind of evidence no denial could erase. I lifted my fork and tasted the onion glaze, slow, deliberate. The sweetness hit first, followed by the depth of the stock, the quiet bite of vinegar. It was perfect. Perfect because I had demanded it be perfect, because I had refused to let anyone rush what needed time. I let the taste linger, even as Selena snapped another photo, even as my father raised his glass in a toast I wasn't meant to join. I let the truth hum against my tongue like a secret too sharp to swallow. Because this was Exhibit B. The proof hidden in plain sight. The glaze that had taken 48 hours. The lights adjusted by degrees until they kissed every plate just so. The details no one in my family would ever think to notice because to them, perfection was their right, not my labor. But I knew. And Marcus knew. And Elena knew. And soon everyone else would too. The conversation had slipped into one of those quiet lulls, the kind that hover at dinner tables, like a breath held too long. Glasses had been topped off. Silver clinked faintly as servers cleared plates, and for a moment the only sounds were the hum of the chandeliers and the scrape of my father's thumb against his phone screen. Then my mother leaned forward, her voice lilting in that way she always used when she wanted to smooth the edges of the room. She was smiling, pink blush soft across her cheeks, her pearls catching the candlelight. I should tell you all. She began, her tone airy, conspiratorial, as if she were about to share a charming secret. Olivia gave me the most wonderful tote bag last year. Sturdy, practical, very thoughtful. Her eyes darted toward me just briefly, a flicker that said she was including me but not truly speaking to me. Then she turned back to the table, her smile widening. It's become my favorite thing to carry the cleaning supplies in. Bleach scrubs, all of it fits perfectly. The words dropped lightly, but they landed like a slap. Around the table, laughter fluttered, soft, indulgent, polite. My sister covered her mouth as if the image were funny. Adrian offered a nod, and a smile that suggested usefulness was the highest compliment he could imagine. Even my father, still half absorbed in his screen, let out a chuckle as though my mother had performed a trick. And me? I kept my smile, steady lips curved, eyes unmoving. I didn't let the flicker of heat in my chest rise to my face. I didn't let the ache in my throat show. My smile stayed in place like a mask nailed to the skin, but inside something twisted hard. Because it wasn't just a bag. It was the tote I had designed myself, a limited run we had given to guests when Maison Verde hit its first anniversary. Heavy canvas, reinforced seams, subtle embroidery of the restaurant's crest. I'd ordered them with pride, believing they would be carried through farmers' markets and bookshops worn like quiet badges of belonging. I had given one to my mother as a way of reaching across the distance, of offering her a piece of me that she might actually carry. And now at her lips, it was nothing more than a container for bleach. A vessel for scrubbing, scouring, sterilizing. A bag meant to hold the smell of chemicals shoved into the back of closets when not in use. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was precise, surgical. That was her talent diminishment wrapped in a smile erasure disguised as anecdote. She didn't say it cruelly. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She spoke as if it were a compliment, as if she were honoring my practicality. And that was what made it worse. I felt the words like grit between my teeth. My chest tightened, the smile frozen in place while my throat burned with things I couldn't say. How could I tell her that the tote was never meant for bleach? That it was meant to carry fresh produce books, the daily markers of a life lived with intention? How could I tell her that every stitch had been chosen with care, that I had poured myself into it, the way I poured myself into every plate, every glass, every detail of this house? I couldn't. Because she wouldn't hear it. She would only tilt her head, laugh softly, and insist I was overreacting. That I should be proud, she used it so often, proud it had found purpose. So I sat still, smile unbroken, while inside the words pressed like a weight against my ribs. The table moved on without hesitation. My mother's story dissolved into Selena's latest tale of engagement shoot angles and hashtags. Adrian leaned in with his polished affirmations, his voice smooth and shallow. My father's phone lit his face in cold blue, and the moment was already gone for them. But it wasn't gone for me. It lodged deep, a splinter under the skin. Because that's how humiliation works in my family. Not grand, not dramatic, not enough to call out without looking foolish. It's small, precise cutting in ways no one else notices. A tote bag reduced to a cleaning bucket. A gift reframed as a joke. A daughter recast as someone convenient, disposable, unremarkable. My smile stayed fixed. My body remained still. But in my throat, the words I didn't speak thickened like smoke. And beneath the table, my hands curled into fists, nails pressing crescents into my palms. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I wouldn't speak. But humiliation has a memory. And mine was wide awake. The wine had gone to their heads by then, the laughter swelling too easily, the conversation circling the same shallow pools, rings, honeymoons, hashtags, family legacy. The air was thick with perfume and candle wax, heavy with the sound of people convinced the night belonged to them. I let their voices blur, focusing instead on the small details, the scrape of a chair leg against marble, the faint hum of the refrigeration line behind the wall, the subtle tremor of nerves in the staff moving through the room. That was when I felt a shadow pause at my side. Elena. She moved the way only seasoned staff do. Silent, precise, steady, even with a full pitcher balanced in her hand. She had been mine once, my sharpest set of eyes before life pulled her forward and upward. Now she was a team lead, training others in the rhythm of this place, a rhythm she had absorbed from me long before anyone else thought I mattered. She leaned slightly, tilting the pitcher, the clear arc of water catching the candlelight as it filled my glass. And with her other hand steadying the stem, she bent close, her lips barely moving. I still use the notes you gave me. It was nothing more than a whisper lighter than steam rising from the kitchen. But it was enough to split the night open. I didn't move. I didn't let the words show on my face. But my chest tightened. My throat caught. For a moment, the clatter of forks and the hollow laughter of my sister faded, replaced by the memory of late nights in the prep kitchen, scribbling notes in the margins of menus and staff schedules. Notes about glaze ratios, plating symmetry timing down to the breath. Notes about survival, what to do when deliveries ran late, how to hide panic behind calm service, how to build dignity in a job meant to strip you of it. Those notes had been my language. My way of saying, you are seen, you are capable, we are more than shadows in aprons. And now here was Elena years later reminding me that they hadn't vanished into the trash bins with the day's waste. They lived on. In her hands, in her work, in the people she now trained. It was evidence living and breathing past quietly in a room that wanted me erased. I lifted my glass, hiding the faintest tremor of my hand, and met her eyes for a split second. They were steady, fierce in their silence. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. Her whisper was enough, a tether, a reminder, a blade slipped into my palm. And then she was gone. Moving to the next guest, pouring water as though she had said nothing at all. Her expression smoothed back into the professional mask, her hands steady, her steps measured. The table never noticed. My mother was telling a story about pearls. Selena was mid-laugh, Adrian nodding like a bobblehead in a suit. My father's phone glowed blue. None of them saw the exchange. None of them would ever imagine that one of the staff had broken the script to slip me a truth they couldn't erase. I sat back, glass in hand, the water trembling faintly as I lifted it. My reflection rippled in the surface, distorted but present, undeniable. And beneath the noise, beneath the weight of humiliation, still clinging to my skin, something loosened. Because Elena's whisper wasn't just loyalty. It was proof. Proof that what I had built mattered, that the hours of sweat and silence had left a mark no insult could scrub away. Proof that my family's version of me, the poor trash worker, the convenient afterthought, wasn't the only story that existed. There was another one, quieter but stronger, written in the steady hands of people like her. I swallowed a sip of the water she'd poured cool against the heat in my throat. Around me, the table surged forward, blind to the crack that had just opened in their performance. They toasted themselves with champagne, their voices rising, their arrogance echoing against walls they did not own. And I sat with the whisper still ringing in my ear, sharper than any toast, stronger than any insult. I still use the notes you gave me. It was more than memory. It was Exhibit C, a piece of living evidence they couldn't edit out, couldn't laugh away, couldn't deny. And as I set the glass down, I felt my mask slip just slightly. Not in defeat, but in recognition. Because in a room designed to erase me, someone had just reminded me I was still here. And so was my work. The courses kept coming, polished silver, gliding back and forth, the hum of service never breaking its rhythm. I had trained them that way, drilled it into every shift. Silent hands, smooth steps, eyes always scanning the room. Tonight the choreography was perfect, almost invisible, the way good service should be. My family didn't notice, of course. They were too busy laughing at their own stories, too caught in the theater of themselves. But the room noticed. The walls noticed. And apparently so did one guest. He wasn't family. He wasn't a shareholder. Just a man seated 3 places down, invited through some tenuous social connection, the kind of guest who arrives polished and curious, but not yet dulled by loyalty. He raised his glass, slowly, eyes scanning the space as if he were seeing beyond the flowers and the linen. His voice cut through the shallow chatter with a clarity that startled me. "This place has a vibe," he said, deliberate, his tone more observation than compliment. He let the pause hang, then added, "It has her style." His gaze flicked toward me, steady, unblinking. The words froze me. For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard them right. But the table did. Heads turned momentarily, confused glances bouncing between him and me. Selena laughed too loudly, dismissing it with a toss of her hair, as though the remark were some awkward slip not worth holding on to. My mother smiled, quick and shallow, and pivoted the conversation back toward the engagement, her voice just a little too bright. Adrian, ever the diplomat, nodded politely without committing, his hand tightening around Selena's like a cue. But the guest kept looking at me like he knew exactly what he had said, like he had peeled back the curtain for a breath. The air in my throat thickened. I held my glass steady, lifted it with care, and took a sip as if the wine could wash away the tremor inside me. But it didn't. The words stayed alive, echoing under my ribs. Her style. Not Selena's, not Adrian's, not the Hale family's. Mine. It was recognition simple and devastating. Because the room did carry my fingerprint, the way the lighting curved warm over every plate, the way the music settled low enough to be felt more than heard, the way the chairs held people long enough to let them forget the hours. It was me in every detail, every seam. And here finally someone saw it. For a second, silence pressed against the table. My father shifted in his seat, his phone buzzing against the wood. Selena tilted her chin eyes, narrowing, ready to recast the moment as hers. But it was too late. The sentence was already out there, hanging above the candles, undeniable. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than their denial. I let the wine settle on my tongue, the cool weight of it steadying me, and I kept my face calm, my smile just sharp enough to suggest I had heard every word. The conversation stumbled, then recovered. Laughter rose again, artificial and forced like stage lights flaring after a blackout. They wanted to bury the comment, fold it into the noise, erase it before it could take root. But I sat with it, held it close because I knew it was the first crack in their performance, the first glimpse of a truth too bright to hide. A stranger had seen me. A stranger had spoken it aloud. And in that moment, I understood something I had almost forgotten. Truth doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it slips into the room like a whisper disguised as small talk. Sometimes it's just one guest, one sentence, one flash of clarity in a sea of denial. This place has her style. The words replayed in my head steady as a heartbeat, proof that I hadn't been erased, not completely. Have you ever been underestimated because of your work? Comment 1 if you felt it. Comment 0 if you've never had to. The room had swelled to its fullest rhythm, by then voices weaving over one another like an orchestra tuning out of sync. Laughter rose too quickly. Forks scraped against porcelain wine glasses, tilted as though the night itself could be swallowed whole. I sat at the edge of it all, my silence deliberate, letting their noise roll past me like water against stone. But then my father, who had been half absent behind the blue glow of his phone all evening, finally looked up. Gerard Hale, the man who had never once set foot in a kitchen, the man who measured value in market shares and notifications, cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air in a way only he could. Forks paused. Selena turned her head, pearls catching the candlelight as if her cue had arrived. Adrian leaned back solemn, already prepared to echo whatever words were about to follow. My father raised his glass just slightly, his expression unreadable. "We should meet the owner," he said, voice calm, flat as though it were the most natural request in the world. The irony snapped inside me like brittle glass. The owner. The phrase dangled between us, sharp with absence, heavy with omission. He said it without a trace of recognition, as though the person they were searching for was still somewhere outside these walls, a stranger who might be summoned with a handshake and a glass of wine. My throat tightened, my pulse drumming in my ears. Before I could move, before I could even decide whether to break the silence, Marcus stepped forward. He had been hovering all evening, steady at the edge of vision, his presence as constant as the hum of the chandeliers. He carried a decanter, the ruby weight of wine catching the light as he approached. Calm composed the model of service until he set the bottle down with the kind of precision that makes sound louder than words. Then he spoke. "Miss Olivia." He said, his voice measured but undeniable. He didn't glance at me, didn't soften the syllables, didn't give them the courtesy of ambiguity. He said my name like a verdict, like the reading of a receipt stamped in bold. The air shattered. The room moments ago, so loud, dropped into silence, so sharp it rang in my ears. Forks hovered untouched. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Selena's smile faltered, her pearls suddenly too heavy against her collarbone. Adrian blinked once, his composure cracking in the faintest twitch. My mother's hand stilled on her napkin, the blush on her cheeks stiffening like plaster. And my father, Gerard Hale, who had spoken the request, just stared. His mouth parted slightly, the faintest crease between his brows. Marcus didn't waver. He poured the wine smoothly into my glass, the liquid curling against the crystal, his movements reverent final. Then he stepped back, hands clasped his eyes, trained on nothing but the truth he had just released into the room. Ms. Olivia. The word hung there, impossible to take back. A declaration sharper than any toast, louder than any insult. I lifted my glass, slow, steady, every eye locked on me. My mask didn't break. My smile didn't waver. I let the silence swell, let it press against their chests. Let it choke the shallow laughter they'd been living on all night. The owner had been here all along. And now there was no denying it. The glass touched my lips. The wine was rich, deep, chosen by my hand months ago when I'd walked the cellars with Marcus, tasting note after note until the right one sang. It slid across my tongue like proof, like evidence written in flavor. Around me, the performance cracked. Selena's knuckles whitened around her glass. Adrian's polite smile twitched at the edges, his nod delayed stiff. My mother exhaled too quickly, the sound betraying her. My father leaned back in his chair, phone dark on the table, no defense left in his hands. And I drank. Not to them, not to their illusions. I drank to the truth finally spoken. The silence finally broken, the evidence laid bare. Exhibit C, my name, my title, my place at the head of the house they had tried to erase. And the room for once had no choice but to see me. The silence that followed Marcus's words had a pulse of its own, as if the chandeliers themselves had stopped humming to hear what came next. Every eye in the room was on me now, even the ones that had avoided me all evening. My father leaned back, phone forgotten on the table, his gaze sharp with disbelief. My mother's lips parted as if to soothe the moment with some soft denial, but no sound came. Selena's smile cracked at the edges, too brittle to hold. And Adrian, ever the polished diplomat, sat straighter, searching my face for cues the way a man in a boardroom waits for the next slide to tell him what to say. The stem of my glass was cool against my fingers, steadying me. I set it down with deliberate care, the sound of crystal against wood louder than any voice in that room. I let the silence stretch. Let them taste it. Let them feel the weight of their own blindness pressing against their ribs. Then I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Selena, though my words were for all of them. "You're right," I said, my voice low but cutting clean through the air. "I don't sort trash anymore." The words hit like a slap, sharp and final, stripping her insult bare. My mother's hand twitched against her napkin. Selena's face froze, her pearls stiff around her neck, as though even they wanted to shrink from the heat. I didn't pause. I didn't give them the space to smother it with denial. "I own this system," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each syllable. "Every plate you've touched tonight, every glass you've raised, every light in this room mine. You're sitting inside the house I built with my hands, the house you've mistaken for a stage in your performance, the staff you've ignored. They move because I trained them. The wine you're drinking? I chose it. The menu you've praised without thought. My creation. This," I gestured around us, the velvet, the oak, the chandeliers that glowed like crowns, "is mine." The words didn't echo. They landed heavy and irrefutable, sinking into every corner of the room. Selena's lips parted as if to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. Adrian placed a hand over hers, but the gesture looked hollow now, rehearsed his polished facade cracking under the weight of truth. My mother blinked too fast, her blush deepening into something that looked almost like shame. My father said nothing, but the crease in his brow deepened his silence louder than anything he could have spoken. The staff moved quietly, professionally, but I saw it in their eyes as they passed the flicker of recognition, the ripple of pride. Marcus lingered at the edge of the room, steady, unflinching, his loyalty, now written openly across his face. Elena's shoulders squared as she set down another plate, her movements firm, her chin lifted. They had always known. And now the room did too. I leaned back slowly, my heartbeat steadying the weight in my chest, finally shifting into something sharper, cleaner. I had bled for years to make this place breathe. I had swallowed their insults, endured their erasure, stayed silent while they built performances on my bones. But tonight the curtain had lifted, and the truth stood naked in the candlelight, undeniable. "This is my house," I finished softly, my smile calm, now sharp as glass. "And you've been my guests all along." The silence that followed wasn't the hush of denial. It was the stillness of recognition. Would you reveal the truth right away, or let them figure it out on their own? Comment 1 for reveal. Comment 0 for silence. The room was still trembling from my words when the sound came clear, casual, almost playful, yet slicing sharper than anything I could have planned. It didn't come from my family, not from Selena with her pearls now frozen against her collarbone, not from my mother who sat stunned with her blush stiff on her cheeks, and not from my father who kept staring at me like I was some stock ticker he'd never bothered to track. No, the question came from the table just beyond ours, from a woman whose name I didn't even know. She leaned slightly over her voice, carrying in that effortless way of people unafraid to state the obvious. "What's the owner doing dining with guests?" The sentence landed like a spark in dry grass. Small, unassuming, but impossible to contain. At once the air shifted. Forks stilled. Wine glasses hung midair. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim as though the electricity itself had caught its breath. The words settled into every ear, rebounding against every wall, filling the silence that had been trying to hold the truth back. Selena's smile collapsed into something brittle, her eyes darting like she could find a camera angle sharp enough to erase what had just been spoken. Adrian cleared his throat, his polished manners flickering as he reached for his glass, too late, the move unconvincing. My mother pressed her napkin harder against her lap, her knuckles blanching as if fabric could shield her from recognition. My father sat rigid, his phone dark on the table, unable to look away. And then the sound that sealed it. Marcus stepped forward from the edge of the room, calm as ever, the weight of a decanter steady in his hand. He didn't hesitate, didn't soften, didn't offer them the escape of ambiguity. He poured the wine with precision, his voice steady, resonant enough for both tables to hear. "Ms. Olivia," he said, confirming what had already been spoken, branding it into the night like a signature across the air. The silence that followed was electric, charged with realization. It wasn't just my family anymore. It wasn't confined to the Hale table where denial had always been their currency. Now the truth had spilled beyond the perimeter into the mouths of strangers, into the air where it could not be pulled back. The woman blinked, once her lips curving into the faintest smile as if she had guessed it all along. The guests around her murmured their curiosity, sharpening their eyes, flicking between me and the staff who moved with newfound awareness. The performance was broken. The illusion collapsed. I sat still, letting the moment breathe, my hands folded lightly on the table. I didn't nod. Didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth had finally grown legs of its own, carried forward by voices that weren't mine. For years, I had built quietly, enduring their erasure, their insults, their denial. For years, I had been invisible, in plain sight, hidden in the very house I created. But now, in one casual question from a stranger and one unwavering confirmation from Marcus, the silence shattered. Selena tried to laugh, the sound brittle and hollow, a note that didn't carry. Adrian muttered something about misunderstanding his words, evaporating before they left his mouth. My mother's lips moved, but no denial could form. My father's eyes dropped to his phone, but even he knew there was no app, no feed, no market trend that could undo what was already out. Because the truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was spoken, echoed, confirmed. "What's the owner doing dining with guests?" The question wasn't just observation. It was revelation. It was the moment their story lost control. The moment my presence could no longer be mistaken for convenience, for accident, for trash. The moment the evidence of my work, my name, my place, broke open into light. I reached for my glass again, lifted it slowly, and let the silence fill with the weight of what had just been said. I took a sip, steady, deliberate tasting, not just the wine, but the vindication that came with it. No one could erase me now. Not with laughter, not with denial, not with silence. The truth had been spoken aloud, and it belonged to the room. It happened in the fragile quiet that follows revelation, the kind of stillness that feels like standing inside a bell just after it's been struck. My name was still echoing in the room. Marcus's steady voice, the stranger's question, the silence that had cracked into recognition. And then came the aftershock. Eli, my cousin, the one who usually played the role of background furniture at these gatherings, reached casually into his pocket. The glow of a phone lit his face too bright against the low candlelight. For a moment, I thought he was just doing what we all had grown used to watching my father do, scroll away, vanish behind glass. But then the sound came. My voice. Clear, amplified, undeniable. Invisible work builds visible worlds. The words rang out from the tiny speaker, rising above the clatter of silverware and the shallow laughter that had been trying to patch the room back together. Recording a clip from the talk show I had done months ago, the one none of my family had acknowledged, the one I had almost convinced myself they had never seen. My own face flickered on his screen, my hands gesturing, my eyes steady, telling the truth I had lived every day. Invisible work builds visible worlds. The dining room froze, every flame and every candle caught in glass reflection. Forks paused. Glasses hovered. For one suspended breath, no one moved. Then, like a ripple across water, it began the faintest sound of applause. It started with the table beside us, the same woman who had asked the golden question, her palms meeting softly, firmly, unafraid. Then another across the room. Then two more. The sound was hesitant at first, uneven but real. A smattering of claps in a space that had always belonged to their performance, not mine. The sound grew just enough to break the air. Selena's face went crimson. Her smile shattered her pearls, now anchors dragging her down. She leaned toward Adrian, whispering something sharp, but he didn't echo it this time. His polished nod was gone, replaced by the tight-lipped silence of a man caught in the wrong alliance. My mother, Margaret, sat with her hands folded in her lap, her lips pressed into a line so thin it might have disappeared altogether. She didn't try to smooth it this time. She didn't try to laugh it off. She said nothing because there was nothing left to deny. My father shifted once his phone finally abandoned his eyes, narrowing as though calculating the weight of what had just unfolded. But even he didn't speak. The applause continued in patches, small and scattered, but it was enough. Enough to mark the moment, enough to brand the truth into the walls of the house I had built. Invisible work builds visible worlds. The line wasn't just something I had said once under stage lights. It was the foundation of everything in that room. The chandeliers above their heads, the food on their plates, the wine in their glasses, all born of the invisible hours I had carried alone. And now those words weren't just mine. They belonged to everyone who had heard them repeated back through the echo of clapping hands. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. I let the video play its short course, my voice cutting through the performance like a thread pulled clean from fabric. And when it ended, when the sound of it lingered like smoke, I sat with my glass in hand, letting the silence that followed belong to me. Selena stared at her plate. Her laugh gone, her show dismantled. My mother's stillness was louder than any excuse she could have offered. The applause ebbed, but the truth stayed. The room had shifted. The balance had tipped. Invisible work builds visible worlds. And tonight, in the very house they had tried to claim, my invisible work had become visible at last. The candles were burning lower now, the wax curling down their stems, the room heavy with the residue of broken performances. Plates had been cleared, glasses half empty, and the air carried that strange weight that lingers when a truth has been spoken and cannot be unsaid. My family sat quieter than I had ever seen them. Selena's face still burned, her pearls forgotten against her throat. Adrian's perfect posture had wilted by degrees, as if his suit no longer fit. My father scrolled his phone without seeing anything, the light casting his features in cold blue. His silence more admission than denial. My mother's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her smile finally gone, replaced by the emptiness of someone who could no longer edit the scene into something softer. And me, I sat with my glass, steady, calm, breathing air that finally belonged to me. The echoes of my voice on Eli's phone still lingered in the walls. Invisible work builds visible worlds. It was more than a phrase now. It was proof branded into the night, carried not just by me, but by everyone who had heard it. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm, not a whisper, not a shout. Just the sound of a truth finally allowed its place. You don't need permission from family to become yourself. I said every syllable cutting clean through the stillness. You don't owe anyone a seat at your table if they never once asked how you built it. The words hung there unpolished raw, but they were mine. The lesson wasn't wrapped in courtesy or denial. It didn't ask to be softened. It stood on its own sharp and undeniable, carved from years of silence and scars. I saw the staff pause in the background, eyes catching mine for a second, the flicker of recognition lighting their faces. I saw the stranger at the next table nod slowly, as if the words had been meant for her as much as for me. And I let it settle. Not for validation, not for applause, but for truth. The night had been theirs to script, but the ending was mine. Have you ever drawn a line between yourself and your family's expectations? Comment and share your story.